Hi class. I am so sorry we didn't get to meet today because of the weather, but I hope everyone is safe and cozy at home. So this is going to be the Weekend College Abnormal Psychology class. My name is Dr. McKinney. I used to be Dr. Fatkin, but I got married, so that's why my name is different than what you have seen before. So today what I wanted to do when we met up is to go over kind of what the class is going to entail, everything, your assignments, the tests, and then also just go over a quick history of abnormal psychology. So let's get started. Okay, so you guys aren't new to Weekend College, so you know we'll have two main face-to-face meetings. Unfortunately, we don't have the one today, but we'll have one on January 27th and on February 17th. How I organize the classes is for those first two meetings, I have right when you come in, you'll have a test and you'll have a review guide to go over at least 2 weeks before the test. So you'll be prepared for that. And then after the test, we'll have some class time with lecture, discussions, and some group activities. So I'll split it up since it's, quite a long class. Now, the textbook that we're using is the Durand and Barlow Essentials of Abnormal Psychology, so make sure that you have that. There's going to be 3 exams total, so 2 are going to be at the start of the 2 class sessions, and then 1 will be online. And for the online one, I normally give about a week for people to have time to go in and get that done, so you don't have to do it at one specific time. And then we have 1 written assignment, which we will go over later in these slides. So another aspect of the course that's very important is the online participation and the homework. So since we're not meeting that much during the week, there's going to be a weekly homework assignment, and that's going to be due on Sunday nights in the D2L Dropbox. So if you look on the last page of your syllabus, I'm going to post this to D2L on Monday morning. You will see kind of the layout of the schedule. So all the dates that everything are due, all the chapters to read, everything like that will be on the syllabus. So make sure to check that out on the last page. All right, so your paper, which is not going to be due until the end of February, February 26th, what this is going to be is you're going to be able to choose a fictional movie, a TV show, or a book that displays a character that portrays some sort of abnormal behavior, some sort of mental illness, typical of psychopathology, which just means that it's not normal and not regular behavior. So I have a whole page assignment sheet, again, that I'm going to be posting to D2L. So make sure that you go over that sheet, address all those questions, because this is going to be 20% of your final grade. Now, this is going to be very important. So make sure you come to me, talk to me if you have any questions. You're going to need 3 academic references. One can be the book, but you can't use any sites like Wikipedia or just online blogs. So make sure if you have a question about that, talk to me as well. Okay, so during class, what I was going to do is have you write down 5 words that come to mind when someone says mentally ill. And then also list 2 mental disorders that you have heard of. And what do you know about these 2 disorders? And then do you know anyone that suffers from a mental illness? So what I want you to do, think about that. If you have time, maybe write that down quickly, put it to the side, because it's going to have to do with your homework for later this week. So just kind of think about those questions. Okay, another thing I was going to do in class is go over some of the true or false ideas about mental disorders. We know in our society, mental illness and mental disorders, not much is known about them. And usually when we don't know much about something, we're scared of it, and there's lots of stigma around it. So I was going to go over these mental disorders, true or false, but I will go ahead and do that during our next class period. Okay, so with abnormal psychology, the big thing is trying to define what is normal. So if you try to think about it and take a minute and think about how you would define normal. it can be pretty tough, What does normal actually mean? How do we define it? If we tried to put it into words, what would that be? So normal is really hard to define. Now, what's easier to define is abnormal behavior. What goes against the norms? What isn't, what isn't normal? What's not? What's behavior that doesn't occur very often? That's strange. That's what's easier to define, and that's what psychologists have done to be able to capture abnormal behavior and to capture what mental illness is. Now, there's 5 main things that have to define what abnormal behavior is. It has to be statistically rare. So not many people in the population have this abnormal behavior. It also has to be deviant from social norms. So when we talk about social norms, if you went out to eat, there might be one person that's maybe yelling or screaming loudly, and that would be deviant from what is happening in general. So it's not gonna look like everybody else. It also is going to cause that person discomfort. It's going to cause them personal discomfort that's not going to be good. It's also going to affect their day-to-day functioning, which means that it's going to it's going to either make them not be able to do certain things like normal hygiene behaviors or going to work or any of those types of things. And the 5th one causes a person to be dangerous to self or others. So it doesn't have to be every single one of these 5 things, but for it to be abnormal, it has to be at least 1 or 2 of these things. Now, sometimes people mix up abnormality and insanity. So the term abnormality is different from insanity. Insanity is used in court. It's used to see whether people, were actually lucid during the time of whatever crime they committed, to see if they can be held responsible for whatever they did. Whereas abnormality is what we were talking about before. Is it affecting their everyday life? Is it affecting them negatively? Is it against social norms? All of those things. Now, when we talk about psychopathology, this is the study of abnormal thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So that's what we're going to be learning about in this class, and that's what psychologists do when they're looking at abnormal behavior. Now, mental illness has a pretty dark past. Early explanations of mental illness, if we go back into the ancient times, they tried to release evil spirits through this horrible thing called trepanning, which meant that they would drill holes in the person's skull and in their brain, trying to release those evil spirits. So obviously that was a very horrible, traumatic thing to do. The philosopher Hippocrates thought that mental illness was from the imbalance of the 4 humors. So he thought that everybody had these 4 main parts of their body, whether it's phlegm, black bile, blood, and yellow bile, and if those got out of order or out of whack, then that would cause mental illness. Now in the Middle Ages, mental illness was really thought to be because of evil spirits and demons. So they had priests and they had people of power that would do exorcisms against people that had mental illness. And then during the Renaissance, anybody that had or displayed abnormal behavior or mental illness was labeled a witch and then put to death. So a very dark history. Like I was saying at the beginning, abnormal behavior, we don't know much about it, so therefore we tend to put a lot of stigma on it and kind of put the worst case scenario of what it means, and that was definitely the case in the past. Now, psychologists have different ways to look at mental illness. There's a biological model that looks at the body and the brain and how it's connected. Behaviorism is going to look at learned behaviors and how our past learned behaviors are going to influence how we act now. Cognitive are all about our thoughts, how our thoughts impact our behavior. Psychodynamic models. If you think about Freud and psychoanalysis, they're going to think about those unconscious processes. The biopsychosocial model puts all of these together. It kind of looks at the combination of, the biological, the psychological, the social, and the sociocultural. Puts that perspective into where we grew up and how mental illness and abnormality is defined in our culture. What psychologists use for looking at abnormal behavior is called the DSM. So this stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now there's been 5 editions. The most recent is the last 5th edition, and that was published in 2013. Now there's 20 different categories of disorders. So if you think about anxiety disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia and other disorders. Those are just the categories, which covers more than 300 disorders. So it's quite a lot of different disorders that we're going to be talking about in this class. Now, the DSM is important because it takes an atheoretical approach. So this means that it doesn't have any ideas and thoughts about where mental illness comes from. It just tries to diagnose the symptoms and put that into a very reliable category. The DSM isn't perfect. There is a lot to be improved, but it is improving over time. So just because they have these strict standards also doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a correct diagnosis. It isn't a perfect system, but it's all we have. So the DSM, it's very good with having the criteria, like I said, of diagnosing it. Examples include depressive disorders, anxiety, schizophrenia, dissociative, neurodevelopmental, and we'll go over all of these in class. So how common are psychological disorders? About, over 25% of American adults over 18 have a mental disorder in any given year. So, that they say 1 in 4 people are affected by mental illness, and it's a very big statistic. So 61.5 million people in the US. So very common, even though it's still very stigmatized, very common. Now, I want to go over quickly the main disorders and the main categories. So in the DSM, one of the categories is anxiety disorders. So this will include phobias, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress used to be under this, but now it's in its own category. Then we have mood disorders like depression and bipolar disorder. We have eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia. We have dissociative disorders. So the most common one that you've probably heard of is multiple personality disorder, but it is now called dissociative identity disorder. And the main thing with this disorder is that people have a break with reality, so they dissociate with reality. Then you have the schizophrenic disorders, and then you have the personality disorders. Like narcissistic personality, antisocial personality disorder, histrionic, paranoid. There's also schizoid personality disorder, schizoaffective. There's quite a lot, but we'll discuss them later in class. And then we have the alcohol and substance related disorders. All right, so for your first homework assignment, this is going to be due Sunday, January 15th by midnight. I want you to write down like we talked about before, those 5 words that come to mind when someone says mentally ill. Then I want you to list 2 mental disorders that you have heard of. What do you know about these 2 disorders? Do you know anyone that suffers from any of these disorders? And then I want you to extend on these questions and write, 400 to 500 words on the topic. Do you think there's a stigma surrounding mental illness? If so, why? How do you think we can reduce this? And you can go on and kind of extend on any of those questions or focus on 1 or 2, however you like to do that. Really, I just want you to start to brainstorm and talk about just talk about it and get thinking about abnormal psychology and mental illness. And again, I'll put up this criteria up on D2L and I'll create a Dropbox for you to turn it in. Okay, so thank you. I know that was an abbreviated class, but if you have any questions, send me an email. And again, I'll have everything uploaded on D2L Monday morning. Thank you. Bye.